Here at the University of Kentucky, I have been conducting various studies within the insulin-dysregulated horse and forage management of these animals. We recently conducted a survey across the United States looking at how common and why restrictive grazing strategies were being utilized by horse owners and managers here. We found that 91.5% of survey takers had either utilized currently or previously a restrictive grazing strategy. Most common was utilization of grazing muzzles as well as dry lots, and the most common reasons that these individuals were using these restrictive grazing strategies was either to prevent or manage a laminitic episode, as well as to prevent their horse from becoming overweight. Among those individuals that had not utilized a restrictive grazing strategy, many of them were willing to try one, however, were limited to the current situation of which their horse was managed. They didn't have control over that situation. But again, these survey takers that had not utilized these restrictive grazing methods were still familiar with the common forms of restrictive grazing. All survey takers were asked on their welfare perception of restrictive grazing, and it appears that within the US we have a positive viewpoint from a welfare perspective of restrictive grazing strategies. Through these survey results, we asked multiple questions in regards to individuals who had utilized grazing muzzles within the last 2 years. Individuals that had utilized grazing muzzles within the last 2 years did feel that the sward height or the height of grass that their horses was grazing was of importance when the horse was muzzled, and that a 4 to 6 inch sward height was most appropriate for that horse to be able to consume forages but still receive restriction. We also saw that there was a seasonal effect of how long these owners or managers of horses were utilizing a grazing muzzle. As in the spring and the summer, it was much more common to utilize a muzzle, using them for 10 to 12 hours a day, whereas in the winter and the fall, it was most common for 0 hours that these horses were muzzled, which makes sense when we think of how our non-structural carbohydrate content changes not only by time of day, but also how it changes throughout the seasons. And we typically do see the increased non-structural carbohydrate in our spring and summer grasses when we see a significant amount of fresh growth in our forages. We were able to take the results from this survey and apply that to a couple of research projects that we conducted following the survey. One of those was on a dry lot. So we had ID horses that had been turned out to pasture grazing. They were removed from that spring pasture and put onto a dry lot. Within 24 hours of being on a dry lot, we saw a significant reduction in the insulin level in all 6 of our ID horses that were utilized for this study. So we were able to conclude that dry lots did appear to be an effective management strategy. Following this study, we were also able to do a grazing muzzle study with 9 of our insulin dysregulated horses. This study was conducted during the summer months, and we did see that our horses that were muzzled versus those that were unmuzzled did have a reduction in their insulin level when they were muzzled for 10 hours on summer pasture with a sward height or grass height of 4 to 6 inches in height. There's still opportunity for continuation of these studies to see the long-term effects, as well as to see the seasonal effects of utilizing grazing muzzles in different times of years. But these studies conducted here in Kentucky with our insulin dysregulated horses, we did see that dry lots as well as grazing muzzles were effective for managing and reducing the insulin levels in these endocrine dysregulated horses.